I'm just going to center this on my screen. I want to create sort of a reflection on my text here. This is really easy to do. I'm just going to collapse my layer effects here just by clicking on this little triangle inside the layers panel. And I'm holding down the control key here on the Windows side or command on the Mac. And I'm just going to single click on my text layer thumbnail. That loads in all my letters as a selection there. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to go down to the bottom of the layers panel and create a brand new layer. I'll rename this guy to Gradient 1. Now what I want to do is I want to fill my selection with a gradient that starts at white and winds up at nothing, so transparent down at the bottom. So I'm going to hit the X key on my keyboard. That sets white to the foreground color inside my toolbox. You may have to hit the D key on your keyboard first to go back to Photoshop's default foreground and background colors, and then hit X. And then I'm going to go back to the gradient tool inside the toolbox, and I'll pop open my gradient pull down up at the top. And in my particular case, I need to reset my gradients. So I'll just pop open the menu here in the top right, and I'll go down to Reset Gradients, and I will click on OK, and then No. There we are. And it's the second gradient in that I want, this guy right here. So I'll choose him, and I'll hit Enter, bring my cursor back over top of my text, and I said I wanted to start at white and wind up at nothing. So I'm going to click and drag from the top down, something like this. Now, you could wind up with an effect like this if you wanted to. I'm just going to undo one step here, Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac. I'm still on my radial gradient, so that's kind of cool. You can create a radial effect, something like this if you wanted to. In my particular case, I'm going to go back to a linear gradient and then click and drag down, and that will fill all of my letters with a uniform gradient, something like this. And if you're not happy with how your gradient turns out, just undo one step, Control-Z or Command-Z, and give it another shot. Maybe I'll drag down about halfway down the letter T to give myself something like this, or I'll undo that one more time. Maybe I'll start up a little bit higher on the canvas and come down a little bit further. You'll have to experiment, but what I'm going to wind up with is something like that. I'm pretty happy with that. I'll deselect my marching ants. I'll hit Control-D here on the Windows side or Command-D on the Mac. With the Gradient 1 layer still selected inside the Layers palette, I'm going to switch the Layers blending mode to Overlay. There we are. And I'll adjust his opacity. Somewhere around 30 is what I'm after. There, something like that. So now I have this light gradation happening inside my letters. Okay, one more thing I want to do here to create sort of a reflection on my text. I'm going to hold down the Control key and click on my text layer thumbnail one more time. Hold down Command on the Mac, of course. And I'll go and create yet another layer down at the bottom of the Layers panel. I'll call this guy Gradient 2. And with my gradient tool still selected inside the toolbox, and I'm still on the same type of gradient, white to transparency, which is what I want, this time I'm going to drag in the opposite direction. I'm going to start at the bottom and drag up, something like that. Perfect. I'll deselect Control-D or Command-D on the Mac. I'll hit the M key on my keyboard for my rectangular marquee tool. And what I'm going to do is click and drag a selection about halfway up my letters, about something like that. Perfect. Now, right now I have a hard edge selection. I want to soften the edge of this selection, which means I'm going to have to feather my selection. So I'll head up to the Select menu up at the top, down to Modify, and then down to Feather. I'm going to set my feather radius to 10 pixels. I'll click on OK. And then I'll hit Delete on my keyboard and, of course, deselect. Control-D or Command-D on the Mac. There's my effect. Finally, what I'll do over inside the Layers panel is I'll switch this guy's blending mode to Hard Mix. Found just a little bit further down in the menu there. And I'll adjust his opacity down to about 70% or so, somewhere in there. There we are. There's my cartoon text effect here inside Photoshop. Don't forget, you can monkey around with the blending modes and the opacities that I've used inside the Layers palette if you like, if you don't like my results. Also, don't forget, going all the way back to your text layer, double-click on this guy and keep monkeying around with all the settings inside the Layer Styles dialog box. This is how people are creating all the amazing text effects that you see on different websites and on different blogs, and it's all done in Photoshop, and it's all relatively straightforward. So there you go. There's a look at filters and creating special effects as well as type effects here inside Photoshop.